everybody. It's good to be with you. So this has been a long time coming. It's taken a little time for us to be able to coordinate our schedules, and then I was on the road, and but it's now finally the answers to the Ask Me Anything from Rich Logis of Leaving MAGA. You guys remember we did an interview probably a month ago now, or a little longer, and the reaction that we got from that was great. And I think there's a lot of people that are curious, how do I need to talk to my folks, people I know that are in MAGA? What is it that draws people to MAGA? Rich introduced me to another gentleman that I interviewed who was talking about how, he felt like a real sense of isolation, and that drew him in and became community. So before we get started on the questions, so what I did, by the way, is I literally took everybody's questions, kind of put them through a thing and said, what are kind of 10 questions that can cover everything everybody's asked? Because we had like 300 questions. But Rich, why don't you kind of give us an update on what's going on in Leaving MAGA? I mean, it's been growing and picking up a lot of steam. I've been seeing a lot from you. Give everybody, first off, again, the website and kind of what's been going on out there.
Yeah, thank you. And always good to be with you, sir. Thank you for having me back. Welcome back also from your
Thank you.
trip.
Thank you. I got a nice tan going, so that's good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you need to you got some sun there, which well earned and well deserved.
Thanks.
And for us, we continue to grow. We have more testimonials since when I was last with you. We've got more on the way. We've had some who were 2024 Trump voters who have reached out to us. The couple I actually introduced you to, Esmeralda and George Dolias, they were stopped in Southern California by Border Patrol. And they claim, I think accurately, that they were stopped because they're Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
So they reached out to us. We've got some others who were actually MAGA voters in 2024, and they've recently left. And they left based on some strategies that I'll go over a little bit later, because I know it'll come up with friends and family. And we continue to fundraise as well. I know everyone is inundated with requests for money, but if anyone feels like they're in a position to help support what we're doing, they can find us at leavingmaga.org. They can donate there. They can also read all of our testimonials, including Jason Riddles, whom you did the interview with not too long ago, who refused the January 6th pardon. So we continue to grow. I'm happy to say, Adam, that we've actually never been busier.
Good.
And we just need to keep up that momentum, because I do believe that there are many in MAGA for whom cracks are starting to form.
Yeah, this is an important thing. So I'm hoping at some point to interview the gentleman. I think George, right? That's his name.
George, yeah.
And they made a lot of attention because they were, like, hey, we voted for him, but now this. And a lot of the attention they made was, oh, well, you should have known, you deserve it, right? That kind of stuff. And I think what's important here, and I think everybody knows that there's going to be an aspect of that. I mean, I still get it from people when they're like, how could you have ever been a Republican? I'm like, okay, well, anyway. But the key is, are we either going to welcome people back or not? Because the superpower of Donald Trump is he'll welcome anybody back. Rich could tomorrow go on TV and say, you know what, I actually like Donald Trump again, and you'd be in the Oval Office in 2 days. I mean, but you could never cross him again, right? But they're really quick at pulling back, and that's a big question for us to do. So I hope to have more of these kinds of interviews, because I think, at least with my audience, they're really, it's not like just an interest in making people feel bad. They're really interested in, how do we fix this problem, right? How do we come back from this? But let me just start. And again, guys, if you have a chance, maybe while you're listening, go to leavingmaga.org. And if you can, do help. It makes a big difference. And this is not a Trump organization that takes about 89% of your dollars and buys gold watches with it. This money goes into actually pulling people away from the cult. So, okay, so let's start with these questions. So what most effectively entices MAGA supporters to defect? That's kind of what you're alluding to. What are specific issues, kind of personal experiences, social dynamics? What have you seen actually working?
Yeah, I suspect that this topic, the answer that I have, Adam, is going to come up a few times today, because something for me that happened when I diversified my news and information sources, it opened up an entire new world for me of information. And my aperture went from really sealed shut in MAGA, completely info siloed to introducing alternative views and facts about issues that I thought were accurate. I thought that Democrats were coming for our guns and indoctrinating kids in the public schools, and liberals and progressives were importing foreigners to replace white people. I think for people when they leave MAGA, what you'll see often, and it's true with our testimonials that people can read at our site, is that once they come out of the MAGA echo chamber a little bit, even just so ever so slightly, it starts to create doubt.
Hmm.
And as it starts to create that doubt, then it gives someone it makes it uncomfortable for them in that they cannot deny any longer that there might be different beliefs or different facts that they had never been exposed to. It's the case like with George and Esmeralda, when people will say, "You should have known, I told you so." None of that is helpful. And the fact, Adam, is that when people say you should have known, for those who are Trump supporters or they were in the MAGA media bubble, the reality is that they didn't know.
Right.
They did not know, because the politicians and the pundits and the media, the MAGA media figures whom they followed and the information they consumed, did not ever tell them that they might lose a job or that they might be detained unlawfully or that they might be deported unconstitutionally, that they might lose a job if they work for the federal government. They didn't hear that. And so
Right.
we can be stewards of welcoming people when they start to have those doubts, that we show them at leaving MAGA that we are a friendly ear for them. And I think that if friends and family can establish some kind of information bartering relationship where I read a story you send that you give me and you read a story I give you, now it creates the opportunity for more open dialogue for these news stories, because I promise that people in MAGA are very, very misinformed.
Mhm.
Not because they lack intelligence or integrity, but the media that they consume is not honest with them. And there's a reckoning that someone comes to when they realize, wow, I've been lied to and I have believed these lies. And it's really difficult to acknowledge that, but we say it's okay if we admit that we were lied to. The key is, once we learn new information, we need to act on it.
And it's interesting. So, like, I see this as no different than I love space, right? I love like the idea of space, and not space on Earth, but outer space. And so I don't remember which planet, but just recently, maybe it was Venus or Jupiter. They basically discovered another moon, really small, but they discovered another moon. And so I see this as like, okay, prior to 2 weeks ago, I was 100% convinced that Jupiter had, I don't know, whatever it is, two moons. Okay, all these numbers are wrong, by the way, but I was convinced that Jupiter had two moons. Now I'm convinced it has three. Why? Because the information I got in the intervening time has changed my mind. And I think we have to see that this way too. These folks don't think that they're evil. They've been told that I'm evil, that Rich is evil. Actually, Rich and I joked because Rich said I used to hate you, because
Yep.
you were the enemy. And so I think that's what's important to notice, is that when new information comes in, just like with anybody out there, if you learn that something that you believed is wrong, you would change your mind. That's the situation here too. Let's go to the next one, because I think this kind of can feed into it. Is MAGA loyalty primarily to Donald Trump as a person, to a broader identity and grievance set that could survive? Okay, I'm reading like a second grader. Is MAGA loyalty primarily to Donald Trump as a person, or to a broader identity and grievance set that could survive him? So basically, if Trump exits the stage, what's the secession scenario?
I think that there is, I think the answer, Adam, is a combination of the
Mm-hmm.
two. But I do think that once Trump is off the political scene, that MAGA is going to weaken. It will not go away, because MAGA is the brand. It's the brand of right wing politics that never really had a brand name in the past. You know the
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
it didn't. Compassionate conservatism. President George W. Bush, right? That was a that was sort of his brand. But I'm not comparing George W. Bush and Donald Trump, but this was the first. Trump was the first to really brand this type of politics,
And
and
brand it with passion, like, because compassionate
absolutely.
conservative, which I called myself, it's not something that drives you to, it's kind of like a nice title, but it's not like a, MAGA, right? Like a fight title.
Yeah, and with MAGA, because Trump was able to brand this, it's why there is that strong sense of community and the strong feelings of gathering and belonging. But I do think that when Trump is off the scene, yes, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to try to jockey for the titular head of the new leader of MAGA. But when Trump's off the scene, I think a lot of people in MAGA are going to feel a little bit lost,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not going to really know what to do next, and that's an opportunity for us to show them that there's an exit ramp, that there's an off ramp. It's why we ultimately created Leaving MAGA, is that we wanted to be a new community for people leaving and people who have doubts. People have remorse, who have regret. They can come to us without judgment, ostracization. They're welcome with us. But when Trump is finally not in our political conversations anymore, I I'm not going to say that MAGA will unravel, but I do think that it's going to significantly weaken, and that's going to be a chance for us to show people a way out.
And that's an important point. Is this is not just about let's pull people away in October, in November. I mean, this may have an effect on the midterms, but the big thing is, like, do we want this to continue after 2028 or not? And as you mentioned, when Donald Trump either dies or is out of office, whichever happens first at this point, who knows? Um, he is like, that is going to be an opportunity, even if it's only a quarter or a third of MAGA, to kind of peel these folks away. And by the way, it's a good time to remind people, give us all your, like, socials that you have so that people can follow you, because I think it's important to kind of follow you long term on this journey.
Yeah, thank you for that. All of our socials, you can connect with them at our site, leavingmaga.org. We are everywhere. We're at Instagram, Twitter, Threads. We're on TikTok. We've got our own podcast.
Good.
Every way that we can possibly bring this message, we've been doing that, so everyone can connect with us. We're on Facebook as well. Twitter is how you and I first got to know each other. So I spend a lot of time online, more than I would like to, but it's a necessary evil, because it's how I've been able to meet so many people with all of our socials. So please be sure to follow us. We're at YouTube as well. Everywhere that people go for socials, we are there, and you can connect with us at our site.
That's where the people are. And yeah, I mean, I can attest to that. And okay, and I can also attest to the fact that you basically were doing this work when there was nobody with you. It was just you and a slogan, and you've built it since then. And I've been
And
very,
now I got
very
a and now
proud
I
of
got
you.
a red hat, which, in case anyone is wondering what it says I left MAGA.
Love it. Love it. Actually, I have a hat. I'm going to be rolling out some stuff later, but I was wearing it the other day. It's red, and I'm like, oh no, I think people might think this is a MAGA hat. Okay. Next question. For those who left, what was the final straw? Was it one catalytic moment, an accumulation of smaller doubts, etc.? So you can talk, maybe you've talked to so many of these people. What's kind of been the thing,
Yeah,
or
so
many things, I guess?
I like to paraphrase Ernest Hemingway here, because my and for those who left, our epiphanies happen gradually and then suddenly all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a combination of factors that eventually led people to leave. For myself, it took a lot. It took me an entire year to finally walk away from MAGA, because of how emotionally and politically and mentally I was invested in it.
And
So
so
for
you're
me,
saying like a year from kind of first doubt to exit.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And the cracks for me really started with Trump mismanaging the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was January 6th. I didn't support what happened that day. Now, I will admit something that I'm a little ashamed to say, but the reason I was so upset about January 6th at the time wasn't because of the violence that happened that day. I didn't support it, But I was upset because I remember telling fellow MAGA compatriots, all of these people who are storming the Capitol are harming our chances of a 2024 comeback.
Yeah. Yep.
That was my thinking at the time. And I'm really embarrassed to admit that because I knew that there was violence. I knew law enforcement had been attacked. But that's what I thought that day. I was worried about damage control and I was worried about a political comeback. So January 6th was a factor. I never believed the election was stolen. Trump's election lies. I knew that he was traumatizing his supporters over and over and over again by saying that the election was stolen when I knew that it wasn't. And then there was also some other factors that were accelerants for me. Ron DeSantis in the summer of 2021, my governor, he platformed anti-vaxxers at his
Mm.
pressers. And he's now in the news again because of supporting wanting to eliminate all vaccine mandates here in the state of Florida with our surgeon, our surgeon general who, who is redefining and embodying quackery. And they all know better, Adam. They
Yep.
all know
They
better.
all know better, Rich. They all know better.
They
All of
do.
them.
Ron DeSantis, when he platformed anti-vaxxers in the summer of 21, it really confused me. And that confusion led me to continue to, or led me to diversify my news and information at that point. And then the final straw for me was on May 24, 2022, which was the Uvalde, Texas school shooting.
Mm.
So there was a lot that took me to leave. And I know some people who might be watching this might say, why did it take so long to leave? And I think it's a fair point. I understand the frustration and the exasperation that they feel, but everyone moves at a different pace. And for the others who left, it took them quite a while also. Some were involved in QAnon conspiracies. One lady who left, she was introduced to MAGA by her Christian nationalist church. So she had a crisis of faith. We have another gentleman, Anthony, and he's an evangelical. He had a crisis of faith. We had others who left because of what happened during the pandemic and the way that Trump and MAGA just completely botched the national response. Others who left because of what they saw on January 6th. We have one lady named Tori. She had not even been aware that January 6th had happened.
Wow.
So when she finally learned about it, she was mortified by it. And that eventually led her on the path. And again, it goes to show how information silos, they really work to keep people thinking a certain way. MAGA agitprop works, and
Mm.
it keeps and it does create hive mind groupthink where everybody thinks the same and the reason, Adam, is because they're only getting the same sources of information from everyone they listen to and everyone they follow.
It's interesting. So you mentioned the point about they all know. It reminds me how important leadership is because the second tier leaders, let's say Donald Trump is the first tier leader, right? The main kind of influencer, if you will. There's a bunch of other influencers. Those are the congressmen, the senators, the governors that all know better, that could overpower the influence of the prime influencer. But instead, they're just simply entering that echo chamber because it's easier. Because I can get reelected as governor, I can maybe run for president. And look, I've been to war. I'm responsible probably for the death of, some of my enemies. And that's something I live with. I'm okay with it. But I couldn't be okay with the fact that for my political career, I'm now responsible for the death of fellow Americans. And that's how I don't see how these people can look at themselves in the mirror. You mentioned Uvalde, too. I mean, the whole idea of it, I'm pro Second Amendment, but there's got to be limits to it where, you say, well, we need more good guys with guns. There were 100 cops that stood outside for 50 minutes
Yeah.
while these kids bled to death. And the other thing, so I wrote a bunch of notes on this, like, the big thing to keep in mind for everybody, even throughout this AMA and on, is MAGA is an identity. It's not even really a belief system. It's an identity. And when you're talking about changing your identity or leaving your identity, I mean, think to yourself, what would it take for me to say I'm no longer a Democrat? If you're a Democrat, what would the injuries of your party have to be enough for you to take that identity off? And my guess is it would be more than one thing, right? It would be
Yeah.
a number of cumulative things, whether it's you're a Democrat or whether it's you're a Christian or whether it's you're a Muslim, whatever it is. And so I appreciate you saying that. And okay, let's go on to number 4. Otherwise, I'm going to talk more than you. How do committed MAGA voters justify support in the face of Trump's documented scandals and contradictions with Christian and democratic principles? Or how did you justify it to yourself?
Yeah, so I was of the belief that people, Adam, such as yourself, the Liz Cheneys of America, the Democrats, liberals, progressives, were all existential threats to our country.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody believes that, as I did, sincerely, we can justify anything. Because I really do think a lot of people in MAGA, they know deep down that Trump is not an honest person. They know that he's someone who doesn't reflect Christian values. But I'm going to bring it back to your point about identity. And if someone is so invested in that community as part of their identity, they're going to find every which way to defend the conduct and behavior of Donald Trump. Because I really do think that most people in MAGA, if they know that Donald Trump is somebody who lies a lot. If you ever have a conversation with someone in MAGA online, and I have to say that MAGA online, I don't think represents all MAGA people,
Mm-hmm.
because most MAGA people are not online. But the ones who are online, if you were to say to one of them, Donald Trump is not honest about anything, the chances are the reply you're going to get is, well, Democrats aren't honest about anything either. There isn't a defense. They're not saying, no, that's not true. Donald Trump actually is very, very honest. They never say that. It's always the other side
So
is
true.
this.
It's like the butt Biden. You always get the
That,
butt
right.
Biden.
And I'm not saying Democrats are always honest either. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm a registered independent here in the state of Florida. I feel that's the best place for me to be because of leaving MAGA. Our friend Joe Walsh is trying to get me to become a registered Democrat. So I
Take your
always,
time, brother. No hurry.
yeah, I told Joe, I said, Joe, look, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, maybe not yet.
Right.
But I do think that the people in MAGA look at look at Trump as somebody whom they believe is fighting on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And the enemy of MAGA is not really a person per se. It's not an individual. It's a belief that liberalism is evil.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think of it that way when I was in MAGA. I don't think most people in MAGA think of it that way, but it's this idea that liberalism and liberal democracy have failed them. And in fairness, to some extent, many of the people who feel that way, there is some justifiable anger that
Yep.
they might have about that because of, maybe a job that went overseas, or maybe feeling like the government has not represented them well because they're not wealthy, they're not powerful. I can understand where some of the aggrievement comes from, but it gets taken to the extreme in MAGA, where we say that liberals and Democrats and liberal democracy are all existential threats. And I thought that, and then when I finally started to take myself out of the right wing media echo bubble, I realized that it wasn't true. Now it took me some time to realize it, but I eventually came to understand that I had created an entire identity by opposing people who were not really my enemy when I thought that they were.
Very well said. It's the other thing I'll tell you as a Christian, like kind of in the evangelical circles, I'd hear about King Cyrus, right? There's this Old Testament proverb of King Cyrus, who was a really bad dude, but God used him. And there was this messianic rabbi that basically wrote a book called I forget what it's called, but Jonathan Cahn is his name. And he basically said, he compared King Cyrus to Trump and said, God is using Trump. And I got to tell you, that had an immeasurable impact in the evangelical community. And for them to say now, yeah, Donald Trump's evil. Sure, he probably had abortions. Sure, he probably did this, but God is using him. And I'm sorry, somebody can be, super evil, but if you believe God is using that person, there's no talking him out of it. Only God himself can. Let's go on to media ecosystem. What leads people to abandon mainstream outlets for partisan sources? And what are realistic on ramps back to trustworthy information?
Yeah, I'm going to use, I'm going to come back for a moment and reiterate an example
Sure.
that I gave earlier, which is I like to call it, it's basically information bartering. And
Mm-hmm.
what it is someone who, let's say a friend or family of someone in MAGA, we want them talking. I'll get in a moment a little bit to how to, I think, rejuvenate some of those relationships. But if someone in MAGA has a story and someone not in MAGA has a counter article, exchange the stories. See if the person in MAGA is willing to exchange an article about whatever issue it might be, because I promise that most people who are in MAGA consume all day long mis and disinformation. I think that mis and disinformation might be singularly the primary reason why Kamala lost. And you and I worked on, full disclosure, right? We worked on her campaign. You spoke at the convention before she did, immediately preceding Kamala. And I think that whatever, not to relitigate it, whatever one's opinion about her campaign or she as a candidate, I don't think there's any doubt that mis and disinformation contributed to that electoral result. So if there's a way of introducing in a very non-confrontational way counter articles and counter information to what people in MAGA are reading and consuming, it can start to get them to have a I didn't know that moment. And it's a good opportunity for people in who are not in MAGA, rather, to ask their MAGA friends and family when they're in a conversation about something that they know is incorrect. Ask them, where did you hear that from? Find out what the information sources are, because whether you're listening to Sean Hannity or Charlie Kirk or Breitbart, they're all saying, Adam, the same.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, whatever Trump says, whatever someone from the Federalist Society says or the Heritage Foundation, the message discipline is very formidable. And I don't know if Democrats really understand that. And I don't want to make this in me picking on Democrats, but I'm not sure that they do. And I think it's important to partly answer this question as well for us to remember we can't rely on the Democratic Party solely to save
Right.
us. It's
Exactly.
on us as citizens to have those conversations with people in MAGA and try to make inroads and find areas that there are common ground agreements. People in MAGA, they care about economic opportunity, and they care about safe schools and good education and a safe and secure country, but they've been led astray and they've had their fears exploited and manipulated. And again, it's not because they are unintelligent people or because they lack integrity, but because the propaganda works. And we have to, I'm not suggesting that we call them victims, but because all of us are vulnerable to being inculcated by these right wing beliefs, I think empathy is really, really important for us to keep in mind that when we're talking to our MAGA friends and family, what they're saying, that came from somewhere. Their
Right.
thinking and beliefs were shaped by the media and the people they follow.
Well, that's why I think Substack is good because it brings such a kind of rich array. But also, I would say, challenge people, and I challenge myself at this, is like, I often say, like, well, why don't they diversify their news sources? And that's like, well, do you really diversify yours? And that's a question. And, it's interesting. You also mentioned the articles thing. And I think a key point on that is, and again, I'm teaching myself this lesson. Don't send somebody an article. Offer to swap an article with them, or
Yes,
offer to swap an email making your case. Hey, would you mind if I made the case for X, and then you can make the case for Y, or maybe make the case for Y to me first, and we'll just swap back and forth, no argument, but I just want to read your perspective. I'd love for you to read mine. And all you're doing is introducing seeds of doubt that can
that's
grow.
right.
Okay, let's do bridging conversations. If an independent or centrist wants a good faith dialogue with a MAGA family member or friend, you kind of touch on this, but what topics open doors? What topics close them? What's kind of I'll add, what's an approach that maybe gets people's dander up, or what is welcoming to them? And do you have what's your kind of thoughts on that?
Sure,
And
I've got
and
some.
also when do you disengage?
Um, yes, I think that I want disengagement to be always the last resort, but we have at our website what we call reaching out. It's a guide of don'ts and do's
Ah, perfect.
for friends and family, and it's a blueprint. I like to say it's a work in progress, but it has had actual real world success in getting people who were MAGA voters in 24 to leave. And I'd like to go over some of them, the don'ts
Sure.
and
Yeah.
do's, because
I think it's
some of the don'ts we have are not to lean heavily on biography, credentials, or expertise. I know that experts have made our world and our country a healthier, wealthier, and safer society, but there is an anti-science and anti-education component to the MAGA ethos within the community, and talking about expertise, it results in a dead end. So it's one
Mhm.
of the don'ts. Another don't is not to attack, question intelligence, or impugn anyone's integrity. Sometimes we can do that without realizing it. Like, for example, how could you believe that? That's a question. The way that people construe that is they feel like it's an attack on them, and we don't want people feeling that way. Once there's a confrontation, then there's probably going to be quick disengagement, which is what we don't want. Another don't is not to criticize other MAGA Americans. And I'll give a really quick story. When you and I were at the February Principles First event in Washington, this one that just passed back in February, there was a lady there who came to our Leaving MAGA table, and she said, "My Trump voting husband is with me." So I said, "I want to meet him. Bring him over." So he came over, and he saw my table, and his name was George, and I said, "George, I'm you can probably figure out I'm not a MAGA supporter." And I told him, "I don't want you to. I said, I want you to know I don't think you're a homophobe or racist, etc." And he said, "I don't think you're a pinko socialist commie." So we had a little bit of a laugh about this, but something that he brought up in conversation that I've thought a lot about and incorporated it into this is he said, "When I see people insult other Trump voters, I feel like they're insulting me."
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
And I got his point. I can understand where he was coming from, and I appreciate his candor in saying that. So don't criticize other MAGA voters, because the critiques will be taken personally. Another one, and this is one that I confess I still fall into the rut of it, which is to not debate facts and policy.
Mhm.
People do not make decisions on facts. I'm not saying that none of us do, but most people make decisions on perceptions, feelings, and emotions.
So true.
And MAGA is, I have to just be honest about this. MAGA is essentially a wholly emotional community. Any information even remotely refutes the pervasively held beliefs of MAGA, it's shunned, it's kept out. And so, for all the mythology of rugged individualism in MAGA, the reality is it's almost a wholly conformist community because it is emotional, not factual. And I'm not saying that everything that MAGA believes is not factually correct, but the vast majority of what people believe in MAGA is not true.
Mhm.
And I think that that's easily, by every measure and metric, can be verified. So no debate facts, no debate policy. Another one, which is to not try to change the other person's mind or bait them into an argument. Um, I'm thinking about a lady named Stefania. She has a testimonial at our site, which people can read, and she utilized these don'ts and do's with her brother, who was a 2024 MAGA voter. And she was very patient with him month after month after month. And then eventually got to the point where he said to her, all of your points that you've said to me, I think you're right. I can't support this anymore. It's become too much, right? And that goes to show that with patience and love and empathy, people can leave. We're living proof that people can leave. I wish it all happened faster. All of us do, but it does happen, and I think it's going to be happening even more. So those are some don'ts. Some do's, if I could just go over a couple do's that I have
Sure.
also. One is, and we've touched on this, one is a try to search for relatability. And there's something I call it, I joke that it's a miracle, it's miraculous that if an anti-Trump person and if an anti-MAGA and a pro-MAGA person get together and talk long enough, they're going to discover that they actually have agreement
Mm,
on a pretty broad range of issues. And it can create the doubt that can set in where people in MAGA can realize that maybe they maybe the people they listen to who want to divide are doing it on purpose. And
mhm.
I'm not trying to get conspiratorial here, but the MAGA influencers have much more to gain from dividing than from uniting.
So true.
You know,
So
and
true.
again, and I won't say, Adam, that non-MAGA media doesn't do that. That happens. You know, I'm not an apologist for our mainstream media, but when I diversified my news and information sources, I just started consuming traditional daily newspapers. You know, your New York Times, your Washington Post, your USA Today, and it was all of a sudden me discovering that maybe some of what I believed were falsehoods, and it eventually got to a point where it was liberating, but it was painful for me to realize that I had been so wrong, and it was one of the reasons it was hard to walk away. But I could no longer keep living these lies that I had believed. So that's something to try to search for relatability. A big one also that I want to mention as a do is to try to understand why the MAGA person believes what they believe. And I think some people who are not MAGA are afraid of doing this because there's this phobia that if I try to believe what someone in MAGA, if what they believe, it means that I'm accepting it or I'm defending it or I have to agree with it. And that's not what I'm asking anyone to do. I don't want anyone to compromise their mores, their beliefs, or their principles. But if we understand why someone believes what they do, we also can get to the sources of where they're getting their information. And I think that's really crucial as well. The one other do I'll mention, and this is one that relates to friends and family, is if the relationship's a little bit rocky, to ask permission for reconciliation
Mm,
with that friend or relative. And now maybe that means not talking about politics, the point about disengagement. I would always tell everyone use your best judgment, use your discretion, but if there's a possibility of reconciliation, ask for it and try to resuscitate that relationship that maybe the person who's not in MAGA felt like was lost. I just want to give a quick plug to anyone who's going to be for all the people watching. We are starting a multi-week support group for MAGA friends and family.
mm.
Our first one is going to be on September 11th. It wasn't planned that way with that date. It's our first night that we're going to have it. It's going to be for 6 weeks. So people who want to find out about it, get to our site. Make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. These are going to be free sessions that we're going to be doing for friends and family, a place where they can come share their experiences, where they can find some healing, and also get some communication, some proven communication tools. So when their MAGA friends and family are ready to leave, they'll be ready to welcome them and know how to welcome them back. So
Wow.
we're starting that up. Yeah, that's going to be starting up on September 11th. So anyone who wants to participate, you're welcome. But make sure you're subscribing to our newsletter so you get the registration link.
Wonderful. I had to go through that recently with somebody very close to me. We didn't talk for a while, and we went through the reconciliation, and what we both listened to each other, both unloaded on each other, and then agreed to kind of let bygones be bygones on that.
So that was a
Um,
six. I would say that was a successful example.
yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
wasn't successful at pulling them away. It was successful at restoring a relationship, and restoring a relationship is the first step in, ultimately, if you want to pull them away. But the big key here is restore relationships, right? Because there's too much division, and frankly, Donald Trump wins when he divides. I mean, it's a fact.
Yeah, he is the chief divider. I said at the DNC convention in the
Mm-hmm.
video testimonial that his toxic superpower is lying.
Yep.
And now with the relationship you have, if that person ever starts to have doubts, they know that they can turn to you because of that reconciliation, and they know that you'll be a friendly ear to them.
And they'll turn to me if they know that I'm not going to do a big "told you so." Right? If it's a
Right.
big "told you so," they're going to
Agreed.
stuff that down. And that's even for
Hmm.
me. I consider myself pretty emotionally intelligent. I would not, if I had changes, go to a person that's going to tell me, told you so, right?
Yeah,
Nobody
me
wants to go
neither.
through that. All right, let's say common ground beyond Epstein. Which concrete issues, so like is clean water, air, health costs, corruption, community safety, most reliably creates a shared reality and momentum away from extremism?
I think that there needs to be an emphasis here on being in MAGA is it it results in dehumanizing others. It isn't just we disagree. I think that I think Democrats tend to have a little bit more of a, and I'm not saying they don't do this either, but there tends to be a belief that we can have disagreements in good faith. I think at one time that used to exist between the two parties, even with partisan rancor. But in MAGA, I think that people need to be shown as a broader issue about why dehumanizing people they disagree with is very unhealthy for the country, for our civics, and truthfully for themselves. I mean, I was a very rageful, hateful person in MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was always on a fight or flight adrenaline rush. It's forget about taking a day off from MAGA. I never took an hour off from it, and it was year after year after year.
And it's combat. It's just combat.
It's very militaristic. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
really is. It's because I was the real American on the right side of history, and the Adam Kinzingers and the Democrats of America were the fake Americans on the wrong side of history. So I think as an issue beyond Epstein, I think that MAGA voters do care a lot about what we care about, you know, from our economic, how we're doing economically to our kids' education to safe schools. But the challenge is in trying to get them to see that there is no conspiracy against them, right? That was a big belief in MAGA that academia and the media and Democrats they were all unified. They always moved in lockstep, right? And we're laughing because we know it's not true. And
Mm-hmm.
there was this big conspiracy against Trump voters. And if somebody feels that way, that gets them really riled up. It gets them ready to do battle because it's perceived as a threat against themselves and their friends and their family. It's why I always say in virtually every appearance I make that I want to apologize for my MAGA activism because I know that some of my words and my rhetoric, I know it hurt people. You know, I know that it harmed others. It resulted in strained relationships in my own life. And I had to go back after I left MAGA and ask for reconciliation. And everybody I went to all accepted my apology. And one person in particular who was very influential in my life gave me a lot of opportunities in college when I didn't deserve them. He even said to me, Rich, I always knew you'd come back. So I say that because for those out there who have friends and family, please don't give up on them. You know, don't give up on them. But these various issues, there is common ground on them. These are the important issues about, you know, the Epstein story. What's that story to me about? It's about safety of children.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the safety of women. It's about our vulnerable populations and what happened there. And I think that that story is not going away, which is remarkable in our media environment where stories come and go. That story is not going.
Mm-hmm.
It's staying and it's sticking around. And I think most people in MAGA do care about kids. I think they care about their well-being. And it's why I think that there's a cognitive dissonance in MAGA right now where people are asking, why is Trump not releasing all of these files for us to see? You know, why did he tell us that he had it and now saying that he doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people in MAGA are ever so slowly they're catching on to the lying because they know again deep down that he's not an honest person.
The key is don't attack them in a way where they feel that kinship with him. Let them feel this daylight. Um, A few more. These are kind of quick. Community and accountability. What's the right way to welcome a former MAGA supporter? The question is kind of like balancing grace with responsibility for past harms so that defections stick and people don't boomerang back. So I guess the question is kind of like if you just totally like, oh no, everything's fine, can they bounce back? But if you're overly harsh, they'll go back anyway. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, and it is a tricky balance. One of the ways that I think makes it easier though, and this is just a policy of leaving MAGA as an organization, and it's my belief that someone cannot leave MAGA unless they take responsibility
Mm-hmm.
for their actions.
Yep.
You have to have a reckoning of making amends by saying, I made a mistake, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. And I think that anyone who does that, who changes and seeks genuine penitence, I think those are the people who are deserving of grace.
Yeah.
And and I don't think it's enough to just say, well, I was MAG all this time, I'm out. Come welcome me back. I don't think it should be that simple. I think that it all of us have agency. And as much as I've said today, yes, we're susceptible to propaganda and we're all vulnerable to being influenced. All that's true. But at the same time, we are individuals who have free will.
Mm-hmm.
And on my own volition, I decided to become a MAGA activist. No one coerced me, no one coaxed me into doing it. I did it on my own. And it's why I felt it was necessary to make it a public apology, which I did that on August 30th, 2022. So I just celebrated my third Leaving MAGAversary.
Nice.
And I want more Leaving MAGAversaries for so many others. But that grace, I believe it's deserving if the person in MAGA says that they want to take accountability for their past.
Well said. There's two questions, but I realize one of them's kind of just going over what we've done. So this will be the last question. Talking about scope and trend lines, from what you're seeing, are defections increasing? In which subgroups, for instance, evangelicals, veterans, suburban voters, and what conditions accelerate or slow that shift? The conditions we've kind of talked a lot about. You can touch it if you want, but what are you seeing in trends right now?
So I think that they're a little bit across the board because I'm thinking about the ones who recently left and approached us. They're a diverse mix. They're white males, they're Hispanic couples. Um, there are reports we see of Latino farmers and African Americans who were expecting grants from the federal government, and now because Trump decided to put a pause on this aid, which is it goes through litigation, they're discovering that they're not getting aid that they were promised and their business is relying upon, and they're expressing their own doubts. So I think that veterans also, I have to believe, Adam, and you as a veteran, I'm curious your take on this. I have to think that so many veterans are looking at the militarization of our National Guard using federal law enforcement in cities. There are more cities that Trump's going to do it in. I have to believe that the military is looking at this and saying, this is not the oath that we swore. It's the oath to to protect against enemies, domestic and foreign. People in our cities are not our enemies. They are our fellow countrymen and women. And yes, I know that in certain cities, some cities have crime issues. Well, you know what? There's also per capita crime issues in less densely populated areas as well. And in some cases, even higher crime rates and higher drug use and higher murder rates. And red states are not they're not being talked about in the MAGA media sphere. So that's why everyone in MAGA just hears about Chicago and about New York and about Washington. They're not hearing about the other places. And so I feel like there's going to be a really broad coalition coming up of all different races, ethnicities, men and women who are going to start to listen to their doubts. I think the cracks are forming. I think the cracks are forming also with young people. I
Yes.
know
So,
you just had a I saw your conversation recently with Cameron Kasky, talking about why young men gravitated to MAGA. And I think you've pointed this out a lot very well too about the isolation that young men have felt, and there is a male isolation problem. It's a question of if we're not in front of them showing them a solution to that, they're going to go to the alternative, and the alternative is MAGA,
yep.
which is exactly what we saw happen in the election as well, where young people, they moved in flocks to MAGA because they were hearing the information sources they listened to. That's where they were getting it from, and we had no counter to that during the election.
It's interesting on the crime issue. If people were worried about black on black crime, the best thing to do is to put jobs and opportunity in those neighborhoods, right? You need to have strong policing, but jobs and opportunity. And it's like with these guard, I mean, the guard is really not able to even do federal or to do law enforcement. It's kind of a show of force. And by the way, every dictator comes to power on the issue of security. That's all every time. I mean, we could have zero crime, Rich, if we just took every other man in America, put a uniform on him, and put him on the street. Then you'd have no
Right.
crime. The book 1984, you couldn't even have a thought crime because they had control, locked that down. But we decided as a country early on that we didn't want to live like that. And among veterans, look, I think, or let's say those serving in the military, I think there is starting to be, I don't think you're going to see a wholesale move to like Democrats, but I think there is starting to be a discomfort with this community military, the civil military relationship, right? Like the military was always seen as heroes and the National Guard was seen as heroic. Now the National Guard's being seen as the enemy. And that's not a position that I think anybody in the National Guard really wants to be in. So I agree with you. I hope that trend is occurring. Even if you're not going to see like a lot of veterans leave MAGA per se, it may inoculate future MAGA recruitment at least, right? Like people that are less likely to be pulled into that argument. Because that's the other thing is this is still a two-way street. There are people being recruited into MAGA just as
Mm-hmm.
we're recruiting people out of them. And I think we need to keep that in mind. So listen, thank you first off for your vulnerability. I think your vulnerability, your honesty, your willingness to put everything out there is really the key between are you going to be successful as an organization or not, because there's a lot of people that are going to have to show vulnerability to come in. I think it's important for people to know that more than the stuff you produce, and it's cool, like you'll see them out by Mar-a-Lago sometimes with a I left MAGA sign, and I'm sure that makes all the Trumpers pretty happy. And
We're getting ready for another one too. We're
oh,
prepping
good.
for it. Yep.
Yeah, take a look because I think you got pictures of that. But like, the bottom line is, people need. If you're going to leave a community, you have to go to a community. You don't just go to a website that has stuff on it. You're going to a community of people, and that's what you provide. And I want to thank you for that hard work. Do you have anything you want to kind of leave everybody with? Again, let me say, if you can give financially, please do. Um, Even if it's uncomfortable, I get it. There's a lot of demands, but this is helpful. And then, secondly, if you can't, or even if you can, at least sign up for the newsletter, get on that, and stay in touch. Anything you'd love to leave people with?
Yeah, thank you. Again, everyone can visit us at our site, leavingmaga.org, get on our newsletter, follow our socials there. Donations are appreciated for anyone who can. And anyone out there who's hearing this who might be in MAGA, I want you to know that we are here for you as a friendly ear. This is a place where you will find support without judgment, and we are a safe space. We are a destination. If you feel like you're having doubts and you need support, you need someone to talk to, we're here. That's what we serve to do here. It's what we've done with thanks to our leaders and our team. We are on an upward trajectory, but that wouldn't be possible without all of our supporters and our benefactors and our leaders. So for those out there, if any of you are in MAGA and you're hearing this and you're thinking, maybe I should talk to this guy, I want you to know that I'm here for you.
Excellent. Well, Rich Logis, thank you so much. It's been great becoming your friend, getting to know you over these last few years, but thanks for all your hard work. And I'm sure everybody that watches this on Substack and YouTube will agree. They appreciate all you do as well. So thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me.
You bet.